Well, we're now 1 minute into the afternoon, so welcome. I am happy today that Yu Hong from Muhlenberg College, late of the University of Illinois, is here to join with us. I want to make one roadmap intervention, which is we're having so many job talks in so many areas that this is a job talk for the China position, but the fact that you also has some economic background is fine, but it should be judged thought about in terms of the position we've been trying to build for a China scholar. Obviously, you can do lots of other things, and I can turn off my...
But you can do lots of other things too.
I've been known to walk and chew gum at the same time, but it's rare. So that today she's going to talk on a topic that you can read for yourself on the politics of socialist harmonious society after China's neoliberal development. Her dissertation, which I assume this is drawn from to some extent.
Yeah, it's an updated version.
Was at University of Illinois with Dan Schiller as the chair, and James Barrett, Robert McChesney, and Yu Zhao as committee members on class formation and high technology, information and communication as an aspect of China's reintegration into transnational capitalism. Welcome.
Thank you. So I'm Yu Hong, and I'm really excited about this visit because of the reputation of the school, and also because of the great opportunity that I get to share my ongoing research with all these distinguished scholars. So what I'm going to share with you today comes from a paper that I wrote recently, and which will soon be published. The title, as you can read, is "The Politics of Socialist Harmonious Society in the Aftermath of China's Neoliberal Development." Before I get into details, I would like to tell you a little bit about the motivations behind these projects. My early research, primarily my dissertation research, examines China's 30-year pursuit of neoliberal development driven by the ICT sector. And what I have found is that ICT, along with the dominant development model it embodies, has created a predominantly foreign capital-driven, export-oriented, and downstream economic structures. Even in the so-called high-tech leading and the pillar industry of ICT, low-wage, low-tech, and export processing manufacturing capacities actually dominates the industry itself. So this mode of development has, of course, created far-reaching social and political consequences, including a lack of economic sustainability on the one hand, and on the other hand, widespread social tensions. So I think, given this general assessment, it is logical to ask two follow-up questions. One follow-up question is, what measures have been taken, if there's any, to renew China's economic growth? Another follow-up question is, what measures have been taken, if any, to pacify domestic class conflicts? So even though these projects cannot answer all these questions, I think it's important that we start asking these questions by looking at the most recent campaign of Socialist Harmonious Society, the Socialist Harmonious Society campaign. So in these project, I examined this campaign and some of its major social policy initiatives. So let me first put the Socialist Harmonious Society campaign in its context. As I said, for 3 decades, China has been pursuing this neoliberal development with Chinese characteristics, which is defined by David Harvey as the convergence between authoritarianism and the capitalist market economy. So as a result of the state-led capitalist development, China's social relations have undergone significant transformations. In crude terms, class polarization and class formation are the defining features of contemporary Chinese experience. On the one hand, unleashed market forces have already enriched a group of entrepreneurs, urban professionals, and managerial cadres. But on the other side of the urban spectrums, millions of vibrant workers has lost their social welfare and has faced layoffs. In the meantime, as you probably know, the majority of Chinese populations are still rural population. So the entrenched division between the urban and the rural further feeds into the gigantic engine of class polarization. In the past decades, millions of migrant workers flushed into the coastal regions looking for urban-based jobs. For the most part, they are undertaking temporary low-wage, semi-skilled, and highly exploitative manual jobs. So despite its self-claimed socialist character, China's class polarization situation actually has reached an unprecedented level. So here I'm going to share a number with you. In 2006, China's measure of income inequality surpassed the US and even approached the rates of the world's most unequal countries, including South Africa and Brazil. So under the influence of neoliberal ideologies, the Chinese state has been able to sustain its ruling legitimacy by claiming economic success. However, it is not to deny that the capitalist encroachment on social equity has created a widespread social tensions and social resistance. In recent years, workers and peasants around the country has waged numerous protests around the country. In 2005, for example, according to the Ministry of Public Security, 87,000 cases of protest, riots, and what they call as mass incidents took place nationwide, up 50% from 2003. In 2008, in the aftermath of the ongoing global economic crisis, labor contention and labor arbitration again shot up by 98% from 2007, and again rose by 30% in the beginning of 2009. So apart from the threat to its political legitimacy, the Chinese leadership has increasingly realized that uneven development and social injustice at a certain point will undermine China's economic growth. In particular, because of China's heavy dependence on labor-intensive exports economy, and also coupled with the uneven distribution of economic prosperity domestically, along with the underdevelopment of domestic market. So, because of this situation, China is extremely vulnerable to global market slumps, which it becomes very apparent during this ongoing global economic recession. So, to deal with a new wave of ruling legitimacy, since Wen Jiabao and Hu Jintao assumed office in 2003, the national policy has undergone a significant and important reorientation from emphasizing the growth rates towards the priority of social development. And in this context, the campaign of constructing a socialist harmonious society was officially introduced in 2005. And in this policy framework, the main directions includes, above all, rural development, the priority of education, and more active policies in the field of employment. And so the intersections among these three areas, rural development, education, and employment, showcases a new approach of merging social concerns with economic imperatives. So, however, there are still some questions about this whole idea of building a socialist harmonious society. First of all, recognizing that the Socialist Harmonious Society campaign is an attempt to fix the tension between social equity and economic growth, it is still an open question about whether China can really develop a socially oriented model of economic growth. That is the first open question. And the second, given the entrenched and self-expanding interest of bureaucratic capitalism, how much discursive space the leftist concern about economic justice and social equity would acquire in this new policy framework is still uncertain. Yeah. And thirdly, the idea of merging social concerns and economic imperatives sounds great. But the question is, on which terms? So based on these three research questions, I think it is important as a first step towards providing tentative evaluation to examine some of the major social policy initiatives under the auspices of building a socialist harmonious society. So in these projects, basically I looked at two major social policy initiatives. First policy initiative is a state-subsidized expansion of secondary vocational education targeting exclusively rural population, rural youth. And the second focus is a state-endorsed search of charity activities. In these projects, I examined both the social and ideological dimensions of these projects. And at the same time, I also identified the evolving agendas and intentions of these initiatives within the context of China's recent global and domestic political economic developments. So what I generally argue is that both projects deployed a neoliberal notion of redistribution. And by creating quasi-inclusive social institutions compatible with the market economy, these projects try to rationalize and legitimize capitalist dynamics of accumulation. And at the same time, these projects try to create some pedagogical results, meaning creating certain kinds of class consciousness, certain kinds of governed class consciousness. So, so what I have said basically is about the background of research. I also like to say a little bit about the literatures that I draw upon because it has something to do with the approach that I adopted. So basically, I situate these papers within the broad literature on the changing relationship between the state and the increasingly fractured society. Scholars have long noticed that the state's regulatory role in the broadly conceived ideological arena has been considerably restructured, with some functions and practices strengthened and other practices weakened, both induced by and in response to the market economic reform. And at the same time, scholars have noticed the centrality of communication to China's neoliberal development and governance. On the one hand, the ICT sector, as a leading industry to enter the global competition and the global market, has become the major transmission belt between the transnational market dynamics and domestic social relations. And on the other hand, China's commercialized and state monopolized media has also creatively articulated some new ruling practices. So, so given this shared understanding, in these projects, I adopted and expanded the definition of communication. Basically, I argue that both vocational education and charity are two new sides of governance. And their emergence and their engagement with communication not only fulfills some instrumental technocratic functions, but also embodies the long-standing dialectic and communicative relationship between the state and society. So as I have covered the background and approach, now I can get into more details about these two projects. First one, as I said, is an extension of secondary vocational education. In recent years, there has been a very clear trend towards making vocational education more accessible, especially for rural populations from interior provinces. In 2002, the state declared to reform and develop employment-oriented vocational education. And since then, vocational education has been recognized as a crucial nodal point to build a market economy. At the same time, reflecting China's ambition to pursue an ICT-driven economic growth. In 2004, the Ministry of Education pledged to extend vocational education in specific areas, including computer applications, computer numerical control, electrics and electronics, automobile repairing and construction. Under the framework of building a Socialist Harmonious Society campaign, this education reform is part of the effort to build a new socialist countryside starting in 2006 in terms of providing equal access to good education. And actually, up to 2007, nearly 70% of the students attending secondary vocational schools were from rural backgrounds. And so in order to increase the attractiveness of secondary vocational education, since 2007, the central government has started to offer a financial package to cover full-time rural students enrolled in secondary vocational schools. And in 2008, in the aftermath of this current ongoing global economic crisis, the state further injected 1 billion yuan to strengthen school buildings of secondary vocational education in China's central and western regions, and another 3 billion yuan for school renovation in rural areas. All these educational investments have created some far-reaching results already. In 2008, labor exporting interior provinces, including Hebei, Jiangxi, Shandong, Hubei, Guangxi, Hainan, Chongqing, and Shanxi, already scaled up secondary vocational education to a larger size than regular academic secondary education. So apart from building a new socialist countryside, this education expansion has more pragmatic purposes, and it is deeply rooted in the political economy of China's participation in the global market. Because China's low-wage, low-tech, and export processing outward-looking mode of economic growth is dependent upon the huge reserve armies of cheap rural labor. So vocational education in this regard is meant to further facilitate and institutionalize the transfer and the commodification of rural populations, especially in light of the recent collective corporate difficulty to secure workers' commitment in industrial processing industries. So in order to achieve the goal about transforming rural population from interior provinces to urban employment, a 2+1 model has been widely adopted. Rural migrants, after studying 2 years in their hometowns, are expected to finish 1-year compulsory internship in industrial enterprises in coastal regions. And as the State Council predicts, by 2010, the enrollment of secondary vocational schools will reach 8 million people, equivalent to the size of academic secondary education. So it is quite safe to say that the expansion of vocational education will integrate more rural population into the China-based transnational production system. So this training and employment model claims to have created some win-win situations where, I quote, the local governments waives no tuition, students pay no tuition, and enterprises incur no new cost. However, despite this rhetoric, it is uncertain whether this labor exporting arrangement will create long-term trickle-down benefits for rural populations or for the countryside in general. But what is certain is that the expansion of vocational education will create direct benefits for industrial enterprises located in coastal regions because it provides them cheap and even free student workers. Basically, following a human capital logic, this project is meant to create millions of high-quality workers in response to market demands. So this is indeed a market-based labor supply system. And in this system, schools are supposed to revolve around industries, around the market, and majors are supposed to revolve around industries, and human training are supposed to revolve around the market demands. If we look inside this education system, we will actually find that this market-based labor supply system actually is a highly unequal system, in the sense that this education system attempts to teach rural population as a social group to see themselves as nothing except disciplined industrial workers. In vocational schools, quasi-military training on work ethics is often accompanied by moral and ideological education on nationalism, collectivism, socialism, and the spirits of Chinese traditions. Indeed, since China's market reform, millions of peasant-based workers have already become the backbone of China's export manufacturing economy, who nevertheless fall outside of the official trade union system. The state currently is consciously using vocational school to reach out and integrate these new generation of industrial workers into the rank and file. And the intention basically is to sidetrack a radical working class consciousness and to create a mass identification with the socialist market economy. And not accidentally, during my 2007 and 2008 field research, which involves interviews with ICT workers from vocational schools, I find that many of them were ambivalent about their working class status, even though they were working on the assembly lines, doing tedious and hard toils. But they were ambivalent about their working class status. At the same time, they often internalized and strongly expressed the ideology of market-based meritocracy. So I find the vocational education actually has created some subjective and pedagogical results already. More recently, the ongoing economic recession has proved the expansion of vocational education to be prescient. In response to the global economic crisis, President Hu Jintao, for example, at the beginning of 2010, just recently, called for a no delay in the prolonged and arduous task of transforming China's economic growth model, which involves, on the one hand, the need to reduce dependency on exports and investment, and on the other hand, to boost service industries, consumption, and technology. And in this context, the ICT-oriented vocational education once again becomes a nodal point to redefine China's labor supplies and hopefully to upgrade China's comparative advantages in the global competition. So for the period of 2006 and 2020, the state has already given priority to human capital formation in the areas of software, microelectronics, animation, and information service industries. By 2015, vocational schools and the technical colleges are expected to train 1.2 million practitioners and generate 1 million new graduates for software and information service outsourcing industries. So as we know, currently, China's ICT sector actually is dominated by low-wage, low-tech, and export processing manufacturing capacities. But all these educational resources that has been spent in the ICT sector actually underscore the nation's ambition to build a more software-based and information-based economic structures. So this is the general information, the general contour of China's initiative in the vocational education arena. Of course, secondary vocational education is not the only social institution that has attracted a considerable amount of discursive and material support from the state. Charity is another nodal point, focal space, where the notion of redistribution is purposefully deployed. In 2005, the Ministry of Civil Affairs and the China Charity Federation unveiled this landmark policy, which is called the Guideline for Development of Charities for the period of 2006 and 2010. This guideline basically emphasized 2 points. First one, the guideline emphasized the potential of charitable civil organizations, and also it proposed a promotion campaign to popularize charitable education, charitable culture, and charitable spirits. Both ideological and economic agendas underpin the state's campaign of charity. First of all, it is part of the renewed efforts to build advanced socialist culture, and in particular to combat selfishness and short-sightedness born of economic growth among China's ruling elites. And apart from the economic reason, the popularity of charity can also be can be simultaneously converted into economic capital through the commercial logic of Chinese media. So CCTV, mobile TV, for example, donated advertising hours for charity sales after the Wenchuan earthquake. So in order to boost the public's enthusiasm for charity, the state has provided both media and the legal incentives. the new enterprise tax law, for example, makes enterprise charity donation less than 12% of its annual earning to be tax-free. So it is not accidental that in recent years, corporate donation accounted for over 80% of all donations. And at the same time, these officially guided and commerce-friendly mode of development has encouraged urban-based and elite-initiated charity activities. Corporate charity, as a matter of fact, has become the most high-profile, the most conspicuous public events in recent years. Charity party held by Bazaar, the fashion magazine, turns charity into a publicity-oriented and a luxurious goods decorated campaign started with corporate and entertainment celebrities. And the empathy of these elites basically is expressed through personal wealth. So despite this overall popularist approach, these urban-based and elite-initiated charity activities tend to have a very narrow scope and often fails to become a truly inclusive social institutions. And at the same time, the charity culture also encouraged the public to engage in private, repeated, and individual acts of showing empathy to immediate needs, rather than confront the institutional forces of social injustice. So apart from charity activities, charity-related social organizations are also considered by the state to be more suitable to mobilize social relations, mobilize social resources, and to massage social relations in some circumstances. However, under the state corporatist framework, China's charity organizations up to now are still largely driven and monopolized by state. To openly exist, charity organizations are required to be sponsored by an organ of the state and must be registered by the government. So it is not surprising that the 2008 annual report of charitable donations reveals that the state-affiliated Red Cross Society of China and the Civil Affairs Bureau at various levels with their affiliated charity organizations attracted over 89% of all donations in 2008. Another noticeable trend regarding charity organization is that the state corporatist structure of charity has forged institutional symbiosis with the state-owned and market-friendly media systems. China Central TV, for example, since 2007, has taken advantage of its dominant position to promote a series of charity initiatives. And in the meanwhile, the vertically integrated broadcasting and television network also put forward a number of national and local fundraising shows on behalf of the state-affiliated Red Cross Society and China Charity Federations. So indeed, the state monopolized media not only models, but also buttresses a vertically integrated and state monopolized charity system. So there is a recognizing the fact that the state initiated the charity activities, and it is a very commerce-friendly model of development. But there is a major qualifications that I need to make, which is that China's charity development is not just a top-down effort, but also derives its momentum from bottom-up initiatives. Some scholars have already recognized that in response to social upheavals caused by the economic reform, the most noticeable trends since the late 1990s and onwards has been this rapid growth of grassroots charity-related social organizations and concerned with providing social welfare services to marginalized groups. However, because the state control continue to practice the license control, so these grassroots charity organizations often operates in the peripheral of China's associational life. It was not until the 2008 Wenchuan earthquake that charity, for a time being, suddenly became a society-wide grassroots phenomenon. So during the earthquake, instead of suppressing public activism in vain, the state temporarily loosened its control over civil organizing. However, what is interesting is that as a form of incorporation and containment, the Ministry of Civil Affairs quickly declares its regulatory role in this field of charity in 2008, after the earthquake. And up to 2009, thanks to the restrictive NGO registration requirements, the wave of volunteerism that we witnessed in 2008 has largely been restrained. And more tellingly, despite this upsurge of charity organizations during the earthquake period, the two disenfranchised groups in China, i.e. Chinese workers and Chinese farmers, have been excluded almost entirely from associational activities, even in the name of charity. So, what can we generalize about the more broader socialist harmonious society campaign? Basically, I argue that after examining these two specific social policy initiatives, I argue that these concepts actually marks a more sophisticated and socially oriented mode of governance. And what distinguishes this new mode of governance is a neoliberal notion of redistribution, meaning that redistribution aimed at nothing but following the logic of market calculation and sustaining market relations. And I argue that this neoliberal notion of redistribution is really central to the quasi-social institutions that I discussed in this paper. And however, the neoliberal notion of redistribution has serious limitations. First, regarding the secondary vocational education, the official language about education justice is not just spoken in moral or political terms. The convergence between social concerns and economic imperatives, especially regarding the educational resources spent in the ICT sector, is meant to serve the market agenda to achieve a stronger position and more independent position in global competition. So that is about the first projects. And at the same time, as I mentioned, the Socialist Harmonious Society campaign also trying to create some pedagogical results. And in particular, in this field of charity, the state has tried to drum up a culture of pity and a culture of empathy among China's emergent elite class. And so in this systematic attempt to contain popular discontent, the renewed public discourse about humanistic values or human-centered developments turns out to be a form of what Yan Hairong has called Neohumanism, meaning a market fundamentalist understanding about desired human qualities. What is interesting is that the subject groups of these state-initiated pedagogical efforts are not limited to China's working class, but also include China's emergent elite classes. However, it doesn't mean that whose government has become a neutral mediator among conflict class interests. Because as we saw, the corporate dominant access to charity resources indicates the continuity between corporate power and the state power. And at the same time, the class bias of this new mode of governance is also manifested through the state's deliberate intervention on behalf of China's ruling elites to prevent public mobilization and public activism, even in the name of charity. So what I would argue is that despite the popularist and reformist image of whose administration, the government is not a neutral mediator among conflict class interests. So, given the fact that the Socialist Harmonious Society campaign, along with its various initiatives, are still nascent phenomena, what future implications it will have? Basically, I propose that the future direction of China's governance might be shaped by two dynamics in crude terms: neoliberal imperatives nested in a context of human and social development, or vice versa. So in other words, I argue that the tension between the need to pacify conflicted class interests on the one hand, and the imperative to renew the interest of the entrenched authoritarian capitalism will be a constant feature of China's mode of governance. And clearly, whether and under what circumstances these top-down reformist initiatives would be appropriated and even expanded by grassroots forces will be relevant for future research. So that is about this paper. So now we can open up for questions and answers and conversation.
Questions or questions? Tom, good night.
Two questions. The first question, is it your contention that class conflict in China began with neoliberalism? Or was there class conflict before? Then the second question is, what could you reflect on the advantage of your controlling hypothesis? If you look at China only as another neoliberalist state, what is it that you lose in terms of seeing China as an open-ended experiment, trying to balance layers, post-colonial layers, Maoist, and so on? Why reduce China's politics to a single thesis of neoliberal dominance?
So I will answer the first question.
What was class conflict solely the product of neoliberalism, or were there underlying trends?
Okay. Well, I think this is a great question. Class conflict obviously is not the sole result of neoliberal development, because we know that during the Maoist period, despite the absence of capitalist production relationship, there are class relations, there are class hierarchies. But it is a different kind of class relationship. But as China entered the market reform era, the capitalist production relationship becomes the most dominant version that defines social production. So I would argue that the class conflicts and class contention that I'm describing here derives its momentum from these transnational dynamics of capital accumulation. So that is my answer for the first question. And second question, can you rephrase the question?
The question is, where does the idea that China is neoliberal come from?
Okay.
Indigenously,
Right.
would the leadership see themselves as neoliberals?
Right.
Would they define market relations in a different way?
Right, that's a great question, because I think in the academic arena, people are still arguing that whether China has undergone a neoliberal reform or not. There are still debate exist. But what I tend to agree is this notion of neoliberal development with Chinese characteristics. So on the one hand, we need to recognize that the capitalist production relationship has become predominant because of the influx of foreign direct investment, because of the privatization and corporatization of state-owned assets, and because of the encouragement of the non-state capitals. So first of all, we need to recognize that the capitalist production relationships have become predominant. But on the other hand, China's neoliberal development does have its own characteristics. It's not following the universal kind of formula of privatization, liberalization. So China's neoliberal development has its own social formations, and it has its own historical processes.
Dimitri?
Since so much of this is top-down, I was just wondering if there is an education movement going on, especially in the ICT sector. Is there any kind of grassroots sense of use of social media, let's just stick within the charity sphere, for self-organizing and communication that isn't all from state ministries, and there are people on QQ and IPI and these other places using these tools? And if they are, is that a threat to the system?
Right. I think, yeah, that is a very important question because as you can see, this paper basically adopts a top-down approach. So the data that I draw upon are government documents, newspaper articles, and statistics. So it is a very top-down understanding about the trends. But at the same time I'm aware that new media or social media has empowered marginalized social groups to a certain degree. So I don't have a specific example in the charity field, but I do have an example in the field of labor. So during the ongoing global economic recession, there has been an incidence of labor collaboration across Taiwan Straits to protest against the common boss that they have. And so media, online media, actually plays a role in terms of garnering both domestic and international support and kind of creating this transnational labor activism. So on the one hand, new media and like the internet has empowered social groups to some extent and give them communicative resources to organize themselves. But on the other hand, we also need to recognize that grassroots movements of whatever nature tends to be very local, tends to be very isolated due to China's censorship systems. So I don't know, I think, yeah, it kind of goes two ways.
I have a question in terms of the broader macro picture, especially in terms of the demographic changes that Chinese policy has kind of like promulgated and how it is falling. And this is about the idea of economic dividend that China is currently enjoying because of this one-child policy is diminishing demands on the resources, and together with the the last 30 years, the economic development. And how do you see this will change in the next 20 or 30 years? I mean, will the waves of rural immigrant stop, and will that kind of like change the picture? I'm wondering how much of this is a function of like broad demographic changes that's been going on for the last 50 and recent 30 years.
Okay, yeah, that's very important. Because let me give you a little bit of background again.
Sure.
When I'm talking about the vacation education, I'm actually looking at vacation education in the context of labor oversupply in China. So in recent years, actually there is a great irony that is playing out. On the one hand, China have this huge scale of labor oversupply, but on the other hand, because China's dominant economic growth model is low wage, low tax, this model. So this economic model actually has very limited employment contributions. So as a result, around 2004, if you follow China's news, you will see that export processing enterprises in coastal regions actually are facing outbreaks of labor shortages. So in that context, vocational education come into the play. The state wants to use the secondary vocational education to more effectively channel rural population from interior provinces and into these labor-intensive production system. So I don't know about the demographics, but there is one thing that is certain, which is as China's participation into globalization deepens, on the one hand, China will garner economic success, but on the other hand, China will create a huge size of new industrial workers. So what we are witnessing here is an expansion of a new generation of peasant-based workers. And what the state wants to do is to institutionalize this process and hopefully to create a more stable workforce rather than the temporarily peasant-based going back and forth type of workers. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Ernie and then Taj and then Jay.
I wonder if you could, this has been a very interesting but rather general treatment of China's political economy. And your attention to the communication aspect has been modest. So I wonder if you could maybe concentrate a bit more on what you see as the evolving neoliberal patterns in the communication sector that would be of special value to a communication school.
Okay. Well, yes, in this paper I focus on vocational schools and on charity. But the background knowledge that I draw upon is about the political economy of communication in China. So first of all, think about China's ICT sector. China's ICT sector has been this leading industry to enter the global market economy. And so the ICT sector alone has been demanding huge amounts of suitable manpowers and labor powers. And ICT is, because ICT is a largely foreign capital driven and export oriented industry, it is on the forefront to reform domestic social relations. So that is in the context. I mean, this paper is written against the context of the neoliberal development of China's ICT sector.
Do you have evidence that, from your own research, that in fact, relative to manufacturing or banking or other areas, that the ICT sector, that workers in the ICT sector really are, their relations of production are in fact different from the other sectors? Or is that, could you cite some evidence that that's true?
First of all, I think ICT is not alone. ICT is not alone in terms of the economic growth model that it embodies. But on the other hand, because of the strategic significance the state has assigned to ICT, ICT amplified the developmental contradictions that China generally carries. So, in order to highlight the importance of ICT, maybe I can give you, I can show the differences about employment expansion during the 90s throughout the 2000s. During that period of time, ICT is one of the only industry that undergo considerable employment expansion. And the other industrial sectors all witnessed common job cuts. So other sectors are all shedding jobs. ICT is one of the only industries, apart from textile and firm production, I remember, that have positive economic growth. So currently, ICT contributes to 10% of the nation's employment, and also contributes more than 10% of industrial outputs, as well as exports. So it is very hard to deny the importance of ICT, because not only its reform starts much earlier than other industries, but also because of its growing tendencies. And so what I have been telling you is about the ICT hardware manufacturing. On the other hand, we cannot ignore the development of softwares, the development of telecommunications. Put into the context of the ongoing global economic crisis, actually, in order to restructure China's economic growth model, the state has further embraced the notion of knowledge in economy, and further embraced the idea of informationization. So in the, I think in the foreseeable future, we will see informationization almost in every social and economic aspects. So ICT, along with software and telecommunications, are indeed in the forefront of China's neoliberal development.
Thank you. Taj?
I want to know, are there any indicators or examples within the pedagogy of the secondary schools you were discussing, as well as the charities, of how the state is dealing with the difficulty of cultivating, I guess, and teaching kind of class consciousness, while at the same time pushing more Chinese citizens, especially kind of workers, to be active consumers? One of the things you mentioned was just kind of how China now is recognizing that it has to also lead to increase more consumption internally. So how are they dealing with the difficulty of promoting and pushing for active consumption while at the same time promoting class consciousness among the working population?
Okay. So actually, the irony China right now faces is that because the dominant mode of economic growth is low-wage, low-tech mode of economic growth, so it means that despite the double-digit economic growth rates, the majority of the Chinese populations don't have adequate consumption capacities. So I think in terms of turning China into a more consumer-oriented society, the first job is to maybe enhance to improve the income and the social welfare these employment can offer. So that is the material aspects about class formation. And in terms of the subjective aspects of class formation, I think the state obviously wants to sidetrack a radical working class consciousness, because as China is industrializing itself on such a rapid pace, it will be a disastrous situation if China have a second proletarian-driven revolution that is happening. So from the state's perspective, it is their vested interest to sidetrack a radical working class consciousness and to avoid the repetition of history, right? Yeah, and also, as I said, maybe consumer mentality needs to be cultivated, even among wage-based communities. Yes.
Okay. Jay?
Yes, two questions. First is your discussion of this class consciousness as class conflict at times is couched in the working class versus the elites.
Right.
But the data from China shows that over the last 30 years, there's also the emerging middle class. There's the emerging of the lower middle class. And I think some people have argued that because of that, the reclassification, the pattern, and which is different from what we have seen in some of the countries in the past, for instance in Latin America or in some of the other developing countries, that China has been able to sustain this path of development. And so, of course, I think one important issue in this class formation is whether there's mobilization between the different classes. If you wanted to talk a little bit about that. And the second thing is that when you talk about vocational education, this is from the political economy perspective. And but I think there are a lot of people these days looking at China, looking at the more civilizational state or the cultural explanations of how China has sustained the development. And especially when we talk about education, and I think maybe you can say a little bit about in what ways the force of Confucianism, that the emphasis on education, and of course this is we're talking about different education, because vocational education even outside China is very skills driven. But there's also the primary education, there's a university education that China is sort of trying to look at this whole education, this whole big issue. And to what extent the force of Confucianism played in the ways how they internalize this type of education that helps to build skills and help to advance yourself in the society.
Okay. So regarding the first question about reclassification of social class, right? First of all, let me reiterate. In China, current challenge for the state to deal with is the problem of labor oversupply. And so on the one hand, there is a situation of labor supply. On the other hand, the economy is so reliant upon low-wage and low-tech manufacturing activities. So it means that even college-educated students will have difficulties to find a decent job to fulfill their middle-class aspirations in the near future. And it has become very clear during the current global economic crisis. So the state has the intention to avoid the merge between college-based students and their unsatisfaction with the working class that I'm talking about. So the state definitely wants to play divide and conquer tactic, but many college students in China increasingly become aware their precarious position in the labor market. So even though many middle-class kids envision themselves as middle class, but it doesn't mean that the jobs that China offers will help them to fulfill a middle-class aspiration. So yes, so the hope is that China's middle class can expand rapidly enough to absorb popular discontent. But I don't know it will happen as mechanically or as simply as the state envisions. So that is about the first question. And the second question, I think, about education, I have very little to say about Confucianism, but I do agree with you that maybe we need to have a more expanded conception of communication. So in that sense, maybe education is part of the communication. And also we probably need to look at how education engage with media, engage with communication, and what kind of role media plays in creating this society mentality, in creating class consciousness. So yeah.
Let me ask the last question and switch the topic to a different area. As someone who grew up in China, received her higher education in the United States and is now teaching in the United States, if you were to come here, which is a much larger school of education, a school of communication, than at Muhlenberg, what kinds of things would you like to be teaching to American students? What kinds of things should they be learning about China and communications in the context of your background?
Well, that's a great question.
It's a relevant question.
So because so let me start with my research. In terms of my research, I situate China within the context of transnational capitalism. So I don't study China. I mean, on the one hand, I study China just for the sake of studying China, because China is such an important emergent country that will have significant impact on the geopolitical relations, have great impact on the future of the world. And on the other hand, I think China could be such an important window for us to understand the evolution of transnational capitalism. So in that sense, I think even though my research is about China, but in terms of teaching, I can engage with the students by telling them why China's institutional or culture or communication features has something to say about the Western world, about transnational capitalism. And currently, even in the field of political economy, I think there is a tendency to use these Western-based concepts of globalization to understand globalization. But we know that globalization is an uneven process. So we need to have more understandings about how globalization unfolds in different parts of the world. Yeah.
Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming.